ये तो सही
या तो आईसीटी एमएल प्रोसेसर के साथ कौन सा कंपैटिबल है, पहले आपके में एमटेक 100 होगा,
स्टार्ट करते
जैसे
हैं
मेरे
हम।
में एमटेक 11
आपका मीटी
होगा,
कौन सा
तो
होगा?
मुझे 4 चाहिए।
सॉरी हुआ स्टार्ट करें 4 बजे।
इसमें लेक्चर चैटर आ नहीं रहा है यहाँ पे। 36 आना चाहिए ना। 36 is not connected. अच्छा, they all sitting together, 16 people.
अच्छा विनीत जाके सर को देख क्यों नहीं कनेक्ट हो रहा।
How do we see the person presenter और उसका जो आ गया। ओके ओके, स्लाइड्स आर विजिबल।
सर कैन वी स्टार्ट?
Yes, yes, you can start.
Good evening, everyone. A 4-year-old boy presented to us with diminution of vision in both eyes, noticed by the parents for 3 months, for a period of 3 months, which was progressive and not associated with any pain. The history was given by mother and it was reliable. It was also associated with avoiding ambient light for past 3 months, which suggested photophobia. There was a preceding history of mild grade fever for about 2 weeks with no other ocular symptoms. There was no history of any previous episodes of redness, pain, or watering, no history of joint pain, burning, or increased frequency of micturition, chronic cough, swelling, or lesion in any part of the skin, or any skin rashes. There was no history of any other systemic illness, no positive family history, and the birth history was uneventful. On examination, the visual acuity in right eye was finger counting at half meters with PR accurate, and in left eye it was 6/12 with PR accurate. On refraction, refractive error was 0.5 diopter sphere with +1 diopter cylinder in both eyes. There was no acceptance in right eye, and there was acceptance of 6/9 parts in the left eye. Intraocular pressures was 12 millimeters of mercury in both the eye, and the patient was orthophoric. On slit lamp examination, mild circumcorneal congestion was present in both the eyes, and we could see granulomatous KPs in both the eyes. The anterior chamber depth was VH4 and cells were 2+. The iris was within normal limit, and pupillary reactions were D+C+ in both the eyes, and no synechia was present. Lens was clear, and retrolental cells were 1+ in grading. Fundus examination was done, and as we can see, the media was clear, glow was present. The disc was vertically oval disc with CDR of 0.3:1 and NRR was healthy. Around the disc, we can see the subretinal extensive areas of subretinal fibrosis, and there was associated tortuosity of the arcades extending. Also, as I move the pointer, we can see the area of subretinal membrane extending throughout the retina. There were also scars present in the periphery, in the mid-peripheral region. This was the fundus of the right eye. In left eye fundus, the amount, again, the disc was normal, vertically over disc with CDR of 0.3:1, and the NRR was pink, the FR was dull, and the amount of fibrosis was less as compared to the right eye. Also, scars were present in the mid-periphery and the peripheral areas. Systemic investigations were done, and the CBC, LFT, KFT all were within normal limit. ANA was negative, RA factor was negative, VDRL was negative, MON2 test was negative, chest X-ray, toxoplasmosis, and Behçet's were not suggestive of any TB or any other infectious cause. SSOCT was done of both the eyes. In right eye, we can see here the normal architecture of all the retinal layers. However, in this area, which is the region below the scar, the fibrotic area, we can see that there's area of subretinal fibrosis. Also, there's shadowing, which suggests that the retina is also fibrosed. Similar picture was present in the left eye under the macular area and under the peripapillary area under the area of fibrosis. We can see subretinal fibrosis over here. So we reached a diagnosis of subretinal fibrosis with uveitis. Thank you. Further case discussion will be done by Dr. Shreya. Yes, sir.
Just go to the other eye, OCT.
Yes.
You see, at your level, don't label it as subretinal fibrosis.
Okay,
You
sir.
see, it is not written there, it is subretinal fibrosis. You should just describe your findings. What do you think is happening in this OCT?
So beneath, just above the RP Brooks complex and beneath the normal retina, there's area of homogeneous.
Whatever I'm saying, can online people hear or? Yeah, go ahead, please, sir.
There's area of homogeneous lesion present with some shadowing.
You see, there is a homogeneous hyperreflective area in the subretinal space.
Yes, sir.
I cannot appreciate shadowing because underlying choroid I can see.
Yes,
If it was shadowed, I won't be able to see the kind of choroid.
Yes,
It's just a hyperreflective area under the retina,
Retina.
which now usually people have started calling SHREM, subretinal hyperreflective material. So what
Okay,
we
sir.
should know is what are the DDs of SHREM. What all can SHREM be? What all can this subretinal hyperreflective material do? Possibly be. What all can it possibly be?
So it can be fibrosis, it can be neovascularization beneath the retina,
Okay.
and so drucenoid.
Drusen won't be so large.
Yes.
And they would probably lift the RT also. They would be below the RT rather than above the RT. So this can be blood, this can be a coronal vascular membrane, this
Yes,
can
sir.
be a large conglomeration of RNA, sometimes it will be. Or it could be, so there can be many things. And the most worrisome of them is coronal vascular membrane. That is one thing you always have to consider. Don't just directly label it subretinal. Only if maybe because you have seen the fundus photo, and in the fundus photo, whatever is visible appears to be little white, avascular sort of thing. That is why maybe you can say that it's probably a fibrotic thing happening. So whatever you say, correlate with your fundus frequency. Don't, because tomorrow you see this in some other patient, and then you start labeling it as fibrosis, which might be wrong. Similarly, go back to the right side. So again here you see, it might be an advanced case of ARMD with a large disciform scar or what you know.
Yes, sir.
So it is just a scar there, and the overlying retina is thrown into such folds and you cannot make out the architecture of the internal layer. So it means it's a very chronic process which is happening over there. The shadowing that you were talking about, again we'll have to see the top of the OCT, what is causing the shadowing. So unfortunately that has been missed in the picture. Maybe we don't know exactly what is happening. Okay, so the other thing we made out is whatever is happening is in the subretinal space, so it is above the RT Brooks complex,
Yes, sir, above
not in
this.
the choroid. And overall the choroid of this patient is thin. Other things can you note in OCT whether there are cells or not, but I don't see cells there. But have you seen clearly cells in both eyes? That again goes in favor of an inflammatory patient.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, Moses.
Saka, can you just summarize your case?
So we had a 4-year-old boy with gradual onset painless progressive diminution of vision in
Are you
both
using the
eyes.
mic or not?
So gradual onset painless progressive diminution of vision in both eyes associated with photophobia, and so on examination the vision was finger counting at half meters with PR accurate in right eye, and in left eye it was 6/12 with no further improvement and PR was accurate. So there, on refractive error there was not much of refractive error in either of the eye, and so On anterior segment examination, we had granulomatous KPs in both the eyes, and cells were 2+, and retrolensal cells were also present, which was 1+. And so on fundus examination in right eye, there were extensive areas of fibrosis in the peripapillary area, and there were scars, heel scars in the mid periphery of the right eye. And in left eye also fibrosis was present, but it was less as compared to the right eye. And on OCT, as we can
Just
see,
clinical findings.
the clinical
On fundus finding only fibrosis was there,
fibrosis and heel scars.
heel scars. But uveitis was active in enterochambral, you have to say. Cells, flare, retrorental cells, everything was there.
Yes, sir.
And why there was photophobia?
So photophobia can be due to
In your
uveitis. In uveitis, it can be present due to the ciliary involvement, the ciliary body involvement. There can be photophobia because the inflammation is there. Ciliary fast.
So what is the differential diagnosis? See, when you are presenting a case, as Dr. Tityal has highlighted in that PPT, JR's role is you have to give us a comprehensive history, examination finding, what all possibilities are there based on that. And next people will elaborate how you arrived at that diagnosis and how to manage that case. So based on whatever history you have just told us the summary, what are your differential diagnoses?
I made a slide. Should I open it or?
See, uveitis is a broad term, right?
Yes, sir. So, on the basis of
Any specific uveitis that you are thinking of right now?
juvenile rheumatoid arthritis present in younger age group, and but the amount of anterior uveitis and vitritis was less. Anterior uveitis was less, and there was no history of any joint involvement. And it is usually at more than 6
So
years.
no systemic finding,
No
only
systemic
popular findings are there,
Yes, sir.
and you are saying uveitis is minimal.
Yes.
Is there a grading system like that, or
Yes,
is
the
that your
standardized uveitis nomenclature is there for that.
interpretation? How they have graded and what is your case, which category your case falls into?
So they have graded it. They have divided into anterior, intermediate, and posterior uveitis, and for each and every
As far as I
findings.
remember, I think Dr. Salia can correct me, either acute, chronic or recurrent or anterior, posterior and intermediate. No? So you give us a complete diagnosis. No?
So this is a case of so since anterior and posterior both the segments are involved, this is a case of panuveitis, and so but the child has presented to us late, so we made a diagnosis of subretinal fibrosis only.
Is that a diagnosis? Subretinal fibrosis is a complication of uveitis,
Yes,
right?
sir.
So what is your diagnosis? If the
So
examiner
it's a
asks you in
case of
exam,
chronic panuveitis.
and why are you using the word chronic then?
So because the history is of more than 3 months back, and so there is no history of any recurrence.
As per the nomenclature, how would you define it chronic uveitis?
So chronic is more than 3
More
months.
than 3 months of persistent uveitis or uveitis that are already been controlled.
So persistent uveitis. Persistent uveitis.
So in this case, you are sure this uveitis is persisting for last 3 months.
Yes. Yes, so the cells are still present.
Okay, so it's a chronic
Panuveitis.
panuveitis. Your diagnosis. Dr. Sadia?
I don't know anything about uveitis. I'm just trying to.
It's actually what Dr. Praful is trying to say, that how he is seeing is how is it acute or chronic, whether it is relapsing or recurrent. And if it is chronic, then what signs did you see which made you feel that it is chronic? Okay. And likewise, panuveitis or posterior uveitis, how or anterior uveitis, that is the classification. Generally in uveitis, what we do is that by mixing all these things up, then we can have a differential in our mind. And once we have that differential, then we can get some investigations and come to a diagnosis. So he's just saying that for you at your level, what you require to do is first make it into either anterior, intermediate, posterior or panuveitis. Then you can see whether it is acute or chronic, and you can rule out infectious causes. Then come to the age group like you said, in pediatric cases, there are less chances of uveitis, so there are very less differentials. So she does have a slide on that. So once you go in a systematic order, then you will get to know that what can be the possible DD and what diagnosis you can come on to. So for you at your level, it's not necessary that you come to a diagnosis. Subretinal fibrosis with uveitis is even a rare diagnosis for me. So it should not be a diagnosis for you. For you, it should be a pan uveitis, okay, which is chronic.
My differential diagnosis considering the age of the patient is 1, 2, 3. Okay, in exam you should present like this, है ना? You shouldn't say कि सर positive में ये देखना है, investigation ये करना है. That is not clinical. Clinical diagnosis is based on history and examination. Okay.
What Prabhu is mentioning is right, and what you are coming out, and you are already coming out with the answer. Just put it together. So it is a pan uveitis, granulomatous, acute or chronic, I might call it. Chronic, why? Because you see those scars, so they might have been there for a long time. They won't have occurred in say a month, maybe few months. But since the child has maybe presently active photophobia, symptomatic child at present with so much of cells and KPs, so some acute activity is already also there. So you can maybe call it an acute or chronic, or if you don't want to call it that, just call it chronic. But it is a chronic granulomatous panuveitis bilateral. And then you go ahead with and multifocal. You can also add the word multifocal because there is not just one scar, there are multiple scars. So from all this you will have different DDs. If you call it unifocal, you will have some DDs. If you call it multifocal, you will have some DDs. If you call it panuveitis, you will have some DDs. So like he rightly said, that is the approach that should be there. And then you can go ahead with it.
Hello. Pradeep sir, if you are on, then can you give some comments? Okay, I think you can carry on, sir.
Dr. Pradeep, sir, are you there right now? Sir, Dr. Shaurya and Dr. Praful are asking for your opinion on this case. Dr. Pradeep, sir? He has joined, he's trying to speak. ठीक है. Coming on to the case discussion of this, the case that was discussed by Dr. Shakha. Now first we start with uveitis in children. So this was an article that was published by our center, and it showed that anterior uveitis is most commonly seen in children, with JRA being the most common in anterior uveitis. The second in line was intermediate uveitis, with 25% patients with intermediate uveitis, and the most common cause here was sarcoidosis. Just posterior uveitis was most commonly seen in toxoplasmosis, and patients with pan uveitis in children most commonly showed multifocal choroiditis or infective endophthalmitis. Now, what are the infectious causes of in pediatric uveitis? So, the most common in our review article was shown to be toxoplasmosis. Next was tuberculosis. Then came endogenous endoph, CMV retinitis, leprosy, and viral keratouveitis. Now, what are the differential other entities that has to be seen for uveitis in children? So, the first one is JRA, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. But these patients usually present with predominantly anterior uveitis. The posterior uveitis in JRA is very less. So, we have to ask a history of joint pains. ANE and rheumatoid factors are to be seen, and predominantly anterior uveitis is seen. The second entity is juvenile reactive arthritis. So in this, we have to ask a history of conjunctivitis and urethritis. So history of burning, micturition, or increased frequency in micturition.
The third condition is juvenile sarcoidosis. But in juvenile sarcoidosis, pulmonary involvement is less common, and even the serum ACE can be either increased or it can even be normal. The next entity is Lyme disease. It usually occurs in endemic areas, which is not in India, and we have to ask a history of tick bite, any migrating rashes called as erythema migrans, muscle pain, joint pain, or any symptoms suggestive of meningitis. There are few more entities like
Lyme disease is, don't say that it's not there in
India.
there in South India.
Yes.
There are cases of Lyme disease in South India.
Hmm.
Around
Okay. So then there is neonatal onset multisystem inflammation. Sir, it can present. It can be presented as panuveitis, but it is predominantly anterior uveitis with patients coming after. Sorry, sir. Can present as panuveitis. Yes, sir. Then neonatal onset multisystem inflammatory disease. It is idiopathic chronic relapsing disease with skin, joint and CNS involvement. Then there can be masquerade syndromes like seen in retinoblastoma, leukemia and lymphomas. Then there's something called as Blau syndrome, which is familial juvenile systemic granulomatosis. It is an autosomal dominant disorder with granulomatous disease of the skin, joints and eyes. In this, characteristically multifocal choroiditis with uveitis is seen. Now, what are the differential diagnoses for subretinal fibrosis? Just subretinal fibrosis can either occur in white dot syndrome, sarcoidosis, tuberculosis, syphilis, sympathetic ophthalmia. These are few, so these cases can be present even in a pediatric population, whereas pathological myopia, deciform scarring, ARMD, subretinal neovascular membrane is hard to occur in a 4-year-old. Now coming on, so as in our case we had excluded all these causes. Sarcoidosis was ruled out, TB was ruled out, syphilis was ruled out, there was no history of trauma. So after ruling out all these cases, we came to a diagnosis of idiopathic chronic panuveitis, which suggested of white dot syndromes. Now what are white dot syndromes? It is discrete, multiple, well circumscribed yellow-white lesions at the level of retina, outer retina, RP, choriocapillaries and or choroid during some phase of their course. Common presenting symptoms include photopsias, blurred vision, nyctalopia, floaters and visual field losses. Now what are the entities in the white dot syndrome? The first one is Muse, multiple evanescent white dot syndrome. The next one is APM-PPE, acute posterior multifocal plecoid pigment epitheliopathy. Third is birdshot chorioretinopathy. Fourth is serpiginous choroiditis. The fifth, sixth and seventh one, that is the punctate inner choroidopathy, multifocal choroiditis and panuveitis and subretinal fibrosis and uveitis are sometimes considered as diseases of the same spectrum. So
yeah. So just go back to your last slide. Yeah. So basically, first she was describing that what are common causes of uveitis per se in a child, and then she came over to describing what are the common causes of a granulomatous uveitis in a child. Apart from that, then you go on to white dot syndrome, which is not exactly seen in a child. Okay, so that should not be confused that it is a continuation of that. It is that multifocal choroiditis with panuveitis and that spectrum which is also involving subretinal fibrosis and uveitis comes under white dot syndromes, under the umbrella term. Okay, so all these differentials that you are seeing over here, you will probably not find in a child. Okay, so you should really take it in that way. So we will just be discussing how to differentiate now that similar pathologies, if you get how to differentiate amongst them, like punctate inner choroidopathy and multifocal choroiditis and subretinal fibrosis is a spectrum, as she will be describing in the further slides.
So Essex et al. Said that multifocal choroiditis, PIC, that is punctate inner choroidopathy, and all this spectrum is a part of the same entity. So multifocal choroiditis and PIC usually do not present with vitritis or anterior uveitis. But if anterior uveitis is present, so it is called as multifocal choroiditis and panuveitis. If this with subretinal fibrosis is present, it comes under multifocal choroiditis with subretinal fibrosis. And if, as in our case, we saw only multifocal subretinal fibrosis, it is termed as progressive subretinal fibrosis. Now coming on to these three entities. So what are the epidemiological features of these three? They are usually seen in young myopic females, as most of the white dot syndromes are. The age are different. So multifocal choroiditis usually presents in the age group of 10 to 70 years. PIC presents in 20 to 40 years, and progressive subretinal fibrosis presents in 10 to 35 years. Ours was a case of subretinal fibrosis with uveitis, which was a 4-year-old, which was rarely seen, and hence it was diagnosed only after excluding all the other causes. Now laterality, it is bilateral in all three. Progressive subretinal fibrosis can be bilateral and asymmetric, like seen in our case. The onset is insidious in multifocal choroiditis, usually acutely observed in PIC, and insidious in progressive subretinal fibrosis. The course is chronic and recurrent in multifocal and subretinal fibrosis, and self-limiting in PIC. The symptoms are all the same in all the white dot syndromes, usually comes with floaters and photopsias. There can be blurred vision also if macula is involved, and metamorphopsia and scotoma. Now the vitritis is present in multifocal choroiditis and panuveitis. It is absent in PIC and again present in progressive subretinal fibrosis. Our case had retrolental cells and a bit of media haze, which was so hence it was present in our case. Now the lesions. So the characteristic lesion of multifocal choroiditis are usually 58 to 200 micron, creamy, opaque, white-yellow chorioretinal lesions that develop discrete borders over the time. Sometimes they even form linear clusters and streaks. They are usually located in the peripapillary, mid-peripheral and anterior equatorial lesion. In contrast to this, PIC lesions are smaller in size than multifocal choroiditis. They are white-yellow chorioretinal lesions, smaller than MFC lesions. They are limited to the posterior pole and rarely extend to the mid-periphery. Now, subretinal fibrosis are larger than either of these two. They usually range from 100 to 500 micron, white-yellow chorioretinal lesion. They can be either present at the posterior pole or can go up till the mid-periphery. Now, the evolution of these lesions. So, in multifocal choroiditis, atrophic lesions that appear as punched out lesions with pigmentary borders. Whereas in PIC, atrophic scars can be present with a halo of pigmentation. They appear more deeper and more punched out than the lesions of the multifocal choroiditis. Now, chances of ERM, macular edema are lesser as compared to multifocal choroiditis, but PIC characteristically shows CNVM changes, and NSD, neurosensory detachment, is characteristic of PIC. Now, subretinal fibrosis, they have two courses basically. They may either fade without any RPE alteration, they might either become atrophic, or they might enlarge and coalesce into a large white stellate zone of subretinal fibrosis. Now coming on to the investigations. Now the first investigation that...
So, if you will see, basically these are all differentials because they have little bit of a similar picture on the fundus examination. So that is why you should know, if you get these atrophic, chorioretinal atrophic patches punched out, if they are in the macula, then what might be the differential? If they are present in the from around the disc and in the mid periphery, then what is it? And if you have subretinal fibrosis along with it, then what it could be. So this is not just in this particular case of pediatric case. Subretinal fibrosis is mainly seen in adults. So if you are going to see in adults any of these findings, then you should know how to differentiate amongst them, because it depends upon the size of the lesion, the location of the lesion, and whether or not it is associated with any subretinal fibrosis. Okay, even a multifocal choroiditis with a panuveitis can progress and have subretinal fibrosis, just that it will never have that much of subretinal fibrosis as much you are seeing in the right eye. Maybe a left eye, if you would have had similar picture in the right and left eye, only a subretinal fibrosis around the peripapillary area, it would have been a multifocal choroiditis with a panuveitis progressing to fibrosis. Just because there is so much of extensive fibrosis in the right eye is why we are saying that it could be a subretinal fibrosis with a uveitis. Regarding the other white dots as well, so when you talk about so regarding the other white dot syndrome, so say for example when we talk about other pathologies like how we have birdshot retinochoroiditis, which is considered as a stromal choroiditis for that matter. So that is also a sort of choroiditis, and because birdshots generally tend to be multifocal on that note. So will that also lead to progressive subretinal fibrosis, or are we just looking at these three entities which finally end up in subretinal fibrosis on that note?
So the fibrosis component comes when anything becomes chronic. So birdshot, if you are going to see, is also a very chronic and relapsing sort of a thing. So in that case also you might have subretinal fibrosis, just that the chances of having subretinal fibrosis in birdshot is very, very less. Okay, the reason why we discussed the white dot syndrome is just to give that what it comes under, and not as it is a direct differential of this case. Okay, so in those cases you will get a hypopigmented patches which will be in the interonasal area of the disc. Okay, and they will be typically in a shotgun sort of a pattern. So it will not be a differential of this. But yes, if you're saying can it be possible that it might have, it can have, but it is very, very rare.
Now coming on to the fluorescein angiography. So multifocal choroiditis shows early hypofluorescence and late staining. So here are the hypofluorescent lesions, and here as the time progresses we can see late staining. Atrophic lesions in all the cases will show early hyperfluorescence due to window defect, and early hyperfluorescence and late leakage can also be observed in cases of CNV. Coming on to PIC, there is early hyperfluorescence of the inflammatory lesion with late staining. And in subretinal fibrosis also, there's mottled appearance of hyperfluorescence in the early stages of the study, and staining of the lesions without leakage is observed in the late phase. Coming on to the ICG, multiple hypocynosant lesions are seen in all the three, because these are all choroidal inflammations and choroidal vasculature is affected. So ICG shows hypocynosance in all the three entities. Coming on to the OCT, there are drusen-like material beneath the RP at the site of visible spots. It can be associated with more widespread disruption of the outer retinal layers as well. In cases of PICs, it is similar to, the OCT is similar to the multifocal choroiditis. It is just that the area of involvement is different and the spot sizes are different. So that is how we differentiate multifocal choroiditis with PIC. Now coming on to the subretinal fibrosis, there is variable retinal edema, subretinal fluid may be present, and subretinal fibrosis should be present. Coming on to the ERG findings, ERG is abnormal or extinguished in multifocal choroiditis if it is diffusely involved. ERG is usually normal in PIC, and ERG and EOG are markedly attenuated in extensive subretinal fibrosis. Now coming on to our main diagnosis, subretinal fibrosis with uveitis. Now it is a rare variant of granulomatous uveitis. It belongs to a spectrum, as I already told you. It can have subsequent progression to extensive confluent areas of subretinal fibrosis at the posterior pole and mid-periphery, like seen in our patient. Epidemiology is again young myopic women, 86% are female. Spherical error, as the patient is usually myopic, can range from -2.75 to -8.5. Usually occurs at the age of 20 to 40 years with no racial predilection. Pathophysiology, it is an autoimmune reaction of the RP. Pseudogerminal centers in the choroid and retina are present. Epithelioid histiocytes are present in a band-like formation with multinucleated histocytes. Aggregates of CD20 B cells and CD3 T cells and macrophages are present. So the normal retina is replaced by inflammatory infiltrate and fibrogliotic tissue. Now what are the symptoms? Patient usually comes to us with unilateral vision loss, but there's bilateral involvement. Again, our patient also had unilateral vision loss, but the involvement was bilateral, seen in 76% patients, but usually asymmetrical. There can be scotomas, metamorphopsias or photopsias. Signs: anterior chamber uveitis, anterior chamber reaction is seen in 61% cases, and vitreous inflammation is seen in 77% cases. Posterior synechiae, granulomatous KPs and iris atrophies is also observed. Early stage changes have multiple small, round, discrete, yellow-white hypopigmented lesion, the white dots, at the level of RP and choriocapillaries. They are characteristically 100 to 500 microns in size, scattered throughout the posterior pole and mid-periphery. Now again, there can be two courses here. Either these lesions can fade over time or they can coalesce together, forming stellate zones of subretinal fibrosis. What can be the complications? There can be radial bands of fibrosis extending peripherally, causing serous and hemorrhagic RDs. Subretinal neovascular membranes may be present, and macular edema and disc edema can also be present. Now coming on to the OCT, choroidal lesion infiltration can be seen, serous and hemorrhagic RDs can be present, RP atrophy can be present, subretinal fibrosis like we saw in our case, and choroidal nodules can also be present. FA, like I told you, early mottled hyperfluorescence with late staining is present. If there is optic disc and if there is optic disc edema or macular edema, or similarly optic disc leaks and macular leaks will be present. So these are photos showing the FA photos of a right eye of a case of subretinal fibrosis. So there's early mottled hyperfluorescence which increases in intensity as we go ahead. So this is early hyperfluorescence with late staining at 12 minutes. The same case of the left eye, again early mottled hyperfluorescence with late staining. Prognosis is usually poor with vision usually falling up, with vision falling very low. Now what are the treatment? If a patient comes to us in an acute phase, we have to start steroids after ruling out any systemic tuberculosis, but due to waxing and waning courses, use of immunomodulators are often needed. Now immunomodulators can be started easily in an adult, but to start an immunomodulator in a children, we have to be careful about a few things as to which can be started. Now why do we have to shift to immunomodulators? So what are the side effects of long-term corticosteroids? As these white dot syndromes usually have a waxing and waning course, we have to be wary about the side effects of corticosteroids. So what are the side effects? They can be weight gain, Cushingoid state, hyperlipidemia. There's electrolyte disturbances like hypokalemia and hypernatremia. Acne and pancreatitis are also common. Now musculoskeletal problems like osteoporosis, emotional instability, gynecomastia, cardiac arrhythmias are also common. In a child, so we have first of all growth. The growth of the child will be affected if we continue the patient on long-term steroid. Plus, if we have to stop the corticosteroid, there can be high chances of infection in those patients. Cushingoid state, again Cushing syndrome can occur if long-term corticosteroids are given. Electrolyte disturbances are more common in children. So now what are the indications for starting in immunomodulator? Sight threatening, okay. Immunomodulators in children that are specifically given are methotrexate is the first line to be given in children. Next can be azathioprine or mycophenolate mofetil. Now this is a flowchart given by Mehta et al. So we start the patient on either corticosteroid topical or systematic. Now if there's a waxing waning course, so we start the patient with methotrexate or cyclosporin A, MMF or azathioprine. With methotrexate A, if the patient is not responding, we can add a cyclosporin A and MMF, or a biological can be added. Infliximab and rituximab are two agents that has been seen in patients with subretinal fibrosis. Now these are the doses that we usually start with. Methotrexate is started weekly with a dose of 2.5 to 7.5 mg. Azathioprine is started at 1 mg per kg per day, and cyclosporin. So our patient came with subretinal fibrosis only. Only topical steroids were given because subretinal fibrosis was stationary, it was non-progressive, and plus the vision was already low in the right eye. So we just treated him for the anterior uveitis and nothing else. Now these are few studies of the immunomodulators given in subretinal fibrosis and uveitis. So rituximab was proven to be useful. Mycophenolate mofetil as well as infliximab was shown to be useful in patients with subretinal fibrosis and uveitis. But these are all in adult patients. In children, I did not find any case report giving any of the immunomodulators in subretinal fibrosis. Plus we just found another case report of a 3-year-old with subretinal fibrosis, and there was no other case of this in children.
Okay, so basically we just wanted to discuss that subretinal fibrosis is a very rare diagnosis. So basically, we just wanted to discuss about it, that what exactly is subretinal fibrosis and how it looks, and what is the spectrum in which it falls. And secondly, the differentials of uveitis in a child are very few. So you should know what all to suspect, and you should always rule out infectious causes in a child. And then GIA is one major cause, although it does not cause panuveitis commonly, and it is mostly only an anterior uveitis. So basically, you should know how to go about a case when you see a pediatric uveitis. There are very few differentials in such a case.
So it's a nice case, it's a rare case. But basically what you need to understand is your approach to uveitis, and from this case how you can get it. So can you just share it again and go to your differentials of white dot syndrome? Are you sharing the screen?
No, sir.
See, like we discussed in the very beginning, that when you start analyzing this case, what we have finally come to is that it is a granulomatous panuveitis and it is multifocal. Now then, how do you go ahead from there? Go to the differential of white dot syndrome. So this is actually a very, very broad umbrella category, where people have put all the diseases in which you will see some punched out yellow, white, deep lesions in the retina. So everything has been put in this. So if you read Donald Gass's book, he says that as a uveitis specialist, either you can be a clubber, or you can be someone who wants to differentiate between each individual category. So clubbers would have the line of thought that सब कुछ तो idiopathic है. In all the cases you have to give steroids. Why do you want to knock your brains and try to differentiate between these entities? Just give steroids. So yes, those are a great group of people. But Gass has described these entities separately depending on minor morphological differences. And he has tried to differentiate between them and tried to tell you that some of them behave in a different manner. Some of them have a benign course, some of them have a more permanent course. And so you should also try to differentiate, so that at least if not treatment wise, you can at least give a prognostically different value to the patient. Maybe the secondary complications might be different. And tomorrow, if we understand these entities histopathologically better, we also might have targeted therapies. So it is not a very good idea to be a clubber always. You should try to, you will see these yellow white lesions everywhere. So don't just call it a blanket white dot syndrome. In between those, you try to differentiate what these are. Just go back to that. Same side. Yeah. So here, multiple evanescent white dot syndrome is very different, very typical. So we don't have time to discuss all these in this one class. You read about it. APMPP again very different. It will not be at all like your patient. Only thing common is yes, it has some yellow lesions, but the distribution of those yellow lesions, the age of presentation, everything is different. Birdshot again, like you mentioned, and like Dr. Shorter pointed out, more of infronasal lesions than radiating lesions from the disc to the periphery, with very rare fibrosis, otherwise you won't see lack of vitritis. So all those things will be birdshot. Again, this patient is not fitting into that category. So serpiginous choroiditis will have an active heaped up margin. You're not seeing any active heaped up margin here. So like they have rightly put out, all those black ones are not DDs of this case, although they may, by some authors have put it all together and called it white dot syndrome, but they are not at all DDs of this case. So what at all DDs of this case are that you are just seeing a panuveitis with a multifocal choroiditis in a child. So I would just say that the main DD of this case is a multifocal choroiditis with panuveitis. And your child seems to have a lot of fibrosis in one eye, so we are putting it in the category of subretinal fibrosis. So even if you just say multifocal choroiditis with panuveitis, I would say you are still okay. But since fibrosis is more, we are putting it subretinal fibrosis, and now since we are putting it in subretinal fibrosis, we are putting it into a category which has even a worse prognosis. Maybe a child who did not have subretinal fibrosis, just multifocal choroiditis, might have had a better prognosis. And it's obvious your right eye vision is already so down. You are not going to improve it now in any way. That is why also you did not treat it so aggressively, because you know it is not going to improve. So that is the second thing you need to understand in uveitis, how far you want to go ahead with the treatment. Because these treatments are not innocuous. Especially in children, they can have so many side effects. Now today, if you say that no, I want, because someone has given adalimumab with subretinal fibrosis, let me also give adalimumab. Maybe you are not justified. If you are not expecting a visual gain, then sorry, can you hear now? Okay, so if you are not expecting a visual gain, then why do you want to pump the child with that? Okay, so now, first you establish what category it is falling into. So it is falling into a choroiditis type of category. It is falling into multiple type of category, multifocal. Then you said it is a panuveitis. Then you have to determine what part of it is active, posterior or anterior. So the posterior part, well, I'm not seeing the case, I will not fully be able to comment, but from your presentation it seems that it is just a fibrotic kind. It appears to be silent, so let us not worry about it. In the back of my mind, a little worry would be whether the child has developed a choroidal neovascular membrane. So for that, maybe I can make use of angiography. It shows some excessive leakage from early to late phase. Or if I see hemorrhages in that area, then I might have this secondary choroidal neovascular membrane has also developed, and I need to manage that also. Okay. And what you described, the FA features, IgG features of different diseases, again they look very good, but they are not diagnostic. You cannot just say कि इसका थोड़ा सा हाइपर यहाँ है, इसका थोड़ा सा हाइपर वहाँ कम है, लेट फेज अर्ली फेज है, तो उससे this becomes a PIC or this becomes the other. So that also you have to understand. So basically it becomes your clinical judgment only. Now out of these red three, again the PIC category to my mind is again far away from your case. Because that is typically a young myopic female with only few lesions at the medulla. So that also I will not keep a DD. That is why I said I will only keep the last two as a DD. Unfortunately, we don't know the etiology, so it is idiopathic. But those are the last two DDs which are to be kept in such a case. And then yes, you have to take the decision whether you want to treat with systemic treatment or only topical. Since you have decided that your posterior aspect is mostly silent, so you are only managing the anterior aspect with topical steroids. But tomorrow, suppose the patient comes back to you, and the vitritis becomes much more. So uveitis therapy is not a one-time therapy. You have to see the patients in long term.
Yes.
The vitritis becomes much more. Or the left eye also starts showing a patch, suppose near the arcade, a fresh patch. How will you know a fresh patch? It will not be a dull white, punched out deep region. It will have some thickness to it. It will have some surrounding retinal edema. It will have maybe fresh vitritis. So if you feel there's a fresh patch developing in the left eye, then that is the only working eye of the child. Then I have to be much more aggressive about therapy. Then I might go to the level of adalimumab also if required. Stepwise, not that directly. So then that will be the change in management. So you have to keep the patient under follow-up.
Yes.
Any questions? Yes,
practically in pediatric age group versus adult uveitis. So what implications should be kept in mind? Like in pediatric, there will be more side effects of steroids and even the immunomodulators. So should we taper it more rapidly or be anything else to be kept in mind?
No, so basically the amount of time that we can give steroids in an adult is not how much we can give in a child. So obviously anything that is requiring anything more than 3 months, then we need to actually think of some sort of immunosuppression. Okay, because that is the time when there is growth. So we don't want it to refractor. So we can't do that. So obviously we'll shift over to immunosuppression a little bit earlier in the case of a child than an adult. So that is one of the considerations. And also because the complications you would expect more to be in a child, so you will have to tend to treat it a little bit more aggressively than in an adult.
You have asked a general question not related to this case. So actually this case is a small child subretinal fibrosis is a rare diagnosis. So it is a rare case. Let us not confuse with that. So in a child, first of all, you have to be aware what are the common uveitic entities that you see, that they have shown you. So the common ones are the JIA related or pars planitis of young or juvenile sarcoidosis. So these are 4-5 common varieties. And in that, for juvenile JIA, there are very specific recommendations now given then you will start immunosuppression. So even if there are articles that we can have a separate case presentation on that. But see, when a patient requires more than 2 drops of topical steroids for more than a month, then still people are recommending go and shift on to immunosuppressants. So we are definitely going on early immunosuppressants in children, but again keep in mind that these immunosuppressants are also toxic drugs. So yes, methotrexate, child is 6 years, 10 years, 12 years, okay, no problem. But suppose then the child, the person becomes 25 years, because how long you want to give these drugs is also not defined. Sometimes, yes, for 2-3 years, 4 years, and then you will be able to taper, but sometimes you will require it for lifelong. So once the person appears age group of fertility age group, then again it becomes a question: how do you want to continue these drugs? Patient wants to conceive, then you have to give some gap to that. So there will be many considerations when you have to give. And although now many studies say that these do not cause long-term cancers, like if the child has started on methotrexate from a very low age and still continuing, there are studies to show that they do not increase the risk of malignancies. That is what studies are showing. But you never know. You have to be careful. Even for the TNF alpha inhibitors, there are studies which are saying that do not cause, but you don't know. So you have to be very balanced in your approach, very careful. But sometimes when there is a bilateral involvement, when the child has potential of going totally blind, you don't have an option. You can mix and match. Sometimes go ahead with local therapies, give local posterior subcutaneous injections. The child is now 10 years, 12 years. Some of them do allow you to give you an injection. Carefully if you can give.
So out of these 3 entities, one on FA had early hypo, some had the other 2 had early hyper. So what is there a specific pattern which is early hyper, which is early hyper?
Early hyper and a late hyper happens only in the surveillance. Rest, all the white dots will have early hypo and then a late hyper. Okay. And okay. Then there is one thing that she said is that you have to see if there is early hyper which increase is over a period of time. If it comes late, then it is staining. Staining is only because of fibrosis. Any fibrous tissue is going to keep on taking stain every recirculation it goes through. It will take some amount and it keep on becoming more and more brighter in the late phases. Leak is something that you need to differentiate over here. So leak is something which will come and increase during the single circulation. So it will not come late, it will come early. That leak will be either if the disease is active or if there is a choroidal neovascular membrane. If that is how you differentiate. It depends.
In any active choroiditis lesion, since the vessels are leaky, shouldn't there be a hyper in the early phase? Because
Yeah, what is the typical of choroiditis? Unique choroiditis, what is the typical?
So in FA, there's usually early hyper and then late, it increases in staining.
Early hyper?
Hyper. In most fibroid syndrome, except for APMPP.
I think there is some confusion.
even else, what is that typical? Suppose there is a choroiditis patch active and you do fluorescein angiography. What will be the typical finding? Early hyper or early hypo? Okay, so it will be early hypo because there is inflammatory material there which is blocking the fluorescence from behind. So early hypo is the most common. But with time, from the margins, the dye will start seeping into the lesion. So with time, there will be a centripetal increase in hyperfluorescence. So that is the most typical feature of almost everything. Only nudes is different. Sorry, I said it too. Nudes is different. Nudes is early hyper from the very beginning. A typical serpiginous, the active patch will again be hypo, but the scarred patch where your RP is already gone will show partly a window defect, so that might show you a hypo. So don't confuse it with the disease, confuse it only with the mechanism of how you are getting the hyper and the hypo. And why is Muse always hyper? I'm not very sure, but only thing I can say is that Muse is again not a choroiditis now. We say it is a photoreceptor disease. So that is why maybe that hypo thing is not too prominent there. So that is why from early hyper to late hyper. Whereas APMPP, serpiginous, simple multiple choroiditis, any choroiditis active type. Sorry? PIC again, probably those are the atrophic patches. Okay, so probably maybe you are right. PIC might be hyper, but again you are seeing the white lesion where there is some capillary atrophy. So PIC again there is a controversy whether it is actually an inflammatory disease or it is just a CMVF. So it might be just a CMVF, that is why it is early. But okay, you might be right. So there are very few which are early hyper and late hyper. Most of them would be early hypo and late hyper, which comes from the periphery towards the center. Thank you. And on ICG it will be the opposite. ICG, most of them will be hypo only because they are obscuring the choroidal vasculature.
So just a question on what you picked up on earlier. Like, we understand that if it's a case of stromal choroiditis, we expect to have an early hypo and a later hyper. But say for example, in cases of APMPP, where we expect the primary pathology to be in the choriocapillaries in itself. So why do we have a hypo phase there? Because like if you have an active inflammation of the vasculature, we would normally expect to have hyper there, right? So why do we have hypo in APMPP rather than the hyper that we normally expect?
There are some infiltrates that are being deposited over there in that layer. Is why it causes a block source, and that is the reason why you get an early hypo and then a late hypo.
Yes.
It is a block, but later on, like you say, then the dye will come in that inflammation and it will become hyper.
So if it is an inflammation in the vasculature itself, so I mean we can understand how a hypo lesion we can expect in a case of stromal choroiditis, because that would go on to compress the vasculature and then we'd have a late stage seepage of the dye into the lesion. But then if you're talking about an inflammation of the vasculature in itself, so then we'd actually expect to have a hyper lesion, right? Because but then in cases like how we have APMPP, we on the
I have already answered that. It depends on the mechanism. You cannot generalize one finding to all the disease entity. Okay. And
Don't think that there are leaky vessels.
yes.
It's not like their choriocapillaries are leaky like vasculitis vessels are leaky. It's not like that. The choriocapillaries are being blocked by the extra inflammatory cell. If you do an OCTA angiography, then also you get hypoflow area there, black. You won't get extra flow. There is some blocking. There is not. Don't confuse it with the retinal vasculitis where the vessels are overflowing and the dye is coming out.
Okay.
With time, yes, dye will reach there. So then it will be.
Sure.
I think for future presentations, okay, so please keep this in mind. Give more emphasis to clinical examination and differential diagnosis. What you people are doing is, he just presented in I think 5 minutes. The case presentation was over. So the entire discussion was about क्या diagnosis है, how to manage, है ना? But that is not important. In the exam, they will give more emphasis on the history and examination part. Okay, so at least the SRs who are overall in charge of this case presentation, you people have to ensure the resident part is more compared to yours. Okay, and for all the future case presentation, please have a clinical diagnosis. The first presenter or the junior resident, he or she has to let us know based on his findings what he or she feels, what could be the clinical diagnosis possible, and how to rule out them clinically only. Okay. After that, the role of investigation, all this thing comes. Okay, so for you people, clinical skill is very important. And for all the exam going batch, I would request the PPT was already there since morning. You people should have read subretinal fibrosis in chronic panuveitis in pediatric age group, and you should have been asking more specific questions about that, rather than just discussing choroiditis and FFA. It would have been better for you people to discuss specific questions related to that particular case. Whatever discussion you people are doing, that will be dealt in a separate class, where FFA will be taken as a symposium or a faculty lecture. Okay, So please go through the PPT that is there in the application faculty resident group, or else